my great pleasure to introduce our next wonderful guest speaker. He has spoken to our finance group before, some 3 or 4 years ago, I think. Last year, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, it seemed like long ages ago. Many of you will know Michael, that live in Bayside, that he is a councillor, has served on the Bayside Council from 2000 to 2003, before being re-elected in October 2012. A Bayside resident for almost 30 years, married to Inge and has 2 adult children. He's an extensive financial experience and a stockbroker and economist with Phillip Capital Sharebrokers. He's worked also as an economist with the Commonwealth Government and as chief economist, lawyer and the Australian Stock Exchange in 2013 and again in 2016. Michael was awarded the Stock Picker of the Year. Hope he can pick some at the moment in this depressed market. By plenty of good buys, they tell me, by the Australian Stock Brokers Foundation. A couple of great recognitions within the industry. He's well respected and frequently quoted media commentator, and those of you read the Herald Sun on a Sunday, I think it is, he's quite regularly tipping buy, sell or hold. Interesting, one of those comments made a few weeks ago, one of your fellow commentators said sell and you said buy. So it was interesting. I think that's pretty typical of what's going on with the stock market. He's also been heavily involved with the educational side of the finance industry in his role as part-time lecturer for Kaplan's graduate diploma courses, formerly Securities Institute of Australia and FINSIA. Demonstrates a strong commitment to the community through his 35 years plus as a volunteer solicitor with the Bayside Legal Aid, and until recently an honorary director of the Sandy Beach Community Centre, and a member of the Monash Hart Strategic Advisory Board. In addition, Michael speaks on share market and economy to various community groups at no fee, as he is doing once again today. And he was recognised as a senior fellow and life member of FINSIA, Honorary Senior Fellow Corporate Directors Australia. So congratulations, Michael, on your wonderful career so far. You've still got a long way to go, and we look forward to hearing from you about the Australian economy and the financial market as we see at the moment. It's we've got a record attendance here for the year. Obviously, there's a lot of people out there chanting at the bit to hear about what your suggestions are, what we should do, whether we should cut our throats or get on with life. I'm sure that we will appreciate very much what you have to say today. Would you welcome Michael Heffernan?
Well, thank you very much. Did I leave my pen there?
Yes, sorry. My pin's very similar to mine.
They're very sentimental pen. Well, it was given to me by my son. Occasional hat. So anyway, that photo wasn't too bad either, Roger. I've had some worse ones than that. Yeah, you're right there. Yeah, I've seen some worse photos than that. But let me tell you, I want to thank you, Roger, very much for inviting me to talk to you all today. And as I recall, when President Ken Beadle was president last year, I also spoke to the group, the financial group as I understand it, down there at the Sandy Club, and I certainly enjoyed it all very much with this very, very attentive audience. So thank you very much for that. And I'm going to talk about, as Roger indicated, about the economy and the share market and all that sort of thing. And really, it's a great time to be talking to you about the economy and about the share market too, Roger, because it's interesting that the economy, and I'll talk a bit more about it later, is doing quite well, and here we have the share market going down by what, about 5 or 6% or so just in the last week. So there is a dichotomy between the economy and the share market. Now, Roger mentioned I used to give lectures to the Securities Institute students, and I used to tell them that the economy and the share market don't ever disconnect for anything more than the very short term. And that is what the sort of situation is that I would describe it now. So with that as a bit of an introduction, I might say last week it reminded me a bit, you know, how the American share market was doing what it was doing. It had gone up 49% since the Donald got elected back there in November 2 years ago. Got up 49% in 2 years, and what happened last week reminded me of sometimes what you feel like after you've had a really good tasty meal, which you might be having here today perhaps. When you probably eat a bit too much, then you get a bit of indigestion. And I think that is probably the way I would describe what happened with the American share market over last week. And indeed, we went down as well, but that's due to the, as I call it, the infectiousness of share markets internationally. So what I'd like to do today then is to talk about what's going on with the US first, and talk about Donald Trump and his current policies. Then I want to talk about how I do see the Australian economy going, Roger, and in particular I want to talk about the effects of the Banking Royal Commission and the share market generally. And third, I want to talk about what impact the federal election actually might have on the economy and the share market next year, particularly if the Labor Party get elected, and a lot of you here maybe have your own self-managed super fund. You have your own self-managed super fund, yeah. And a lot of people do, Roger, perhaps, with this franking business that Bill Shorten said he's going to get rid of, which is, I think, is going to have an impact on probably everybody who's got superannuation funds, particularly those who've got their own self-managed super funds. I'll talk about that a little bit later on too. But what I want to say right now is this man called Donald Trump, the president of the US. Now, I'll just go back a little bit. Now, when I left school, and this wasn't mentioned in the intro there, Roger, when I left school, I wanted to be a medical doctor. I did chemistry, physics, mathematics, and all that sort of stuff. But I ended up enrolling in economics and law at Monash University. I got into the last 10 places or last 20 places or something in medicine, and they told me I wasn't going to get in at one stage, and then I definitely wasn't going to get in, and then they called me in for an interview. After they told me twice, you're not going to get in, son. And I'd always been interested a bit in politics. You know, I'm involved in the council and all that stuff. Always been interested. I always thought, well, I don't want to go to university to study the thing. I'll enrol for law, because I didn't mind law. So I enrolled for law. Then I went on to this summer camp, and when I was there, the mentors will talk about your subjects, and I was talking about law, and I was listening there, and it was my second choice, you know. And he said, oh, you can combine law with other things, you know. And I thought, oh God, here's a chance, getting two for the price of one here. And he said, you can do it in the same number of years. I said, oh, that's even better. So I enrolled for law and economics, as it was in those days. When I did that, I knew precious little about economics, Roger. I knew precious little about economics, but you know what? After a couple of months, I loved it. Why, you ask? Well, it's fairly simple, because economics to me is all about everyone and every business doing what they do best. That is putting all your energy and resources to where you can get the best return, if I can use that expression. And if all of us do that, if all of us do what we do best, everybody benefits. And as I tell my wife, having studied economics, that's why I mow the lawn and wash the car, and she cooks. I'm in an audience of men here now, but I don't mean that to be at all sexist. But my wife is a good cook. She did home economics at the university or whatever it was, and that's what it was. And she's better at it. I mean, I could spend half an hour cooking the things that'll take her 5 minutes. So, and she'd probably spend a lot of time mowing the lawn. So there you go. But that's the essence of it. Is if you do what you do best, everybody's going to benefit. I get my meals quicker, and she gets the lawn mowed faster and better. So, and put simply into the Donald Trump arena, if China make iPhones better than anyone else, and America makes Boeing aeroplanes better than anyone else, both China and the US benefit by each of them concentrating on what they do best. And so it goes on throughout the whole of the economic universe. But for some reason, Donald Trump sees things differently. So here we have the case of what I call the curious case of Trumpian economics. I call it that. I actually saw a film called the Curious Case of Benjamin. What was it called again? Anybody watch it? Oh, they were pretty silly, frankly. But anyway, I thought it was a good, catchy thing to call the Trump business right now. So because his economic mantra seems to be that you should make everybody worse off. You should make everyone worse off, but a few people better off. To me, that's the only way that could describe what he's doing in putting tariffs on steel imports from China, which adversely affect everybody who buys anything made of steel in the US, because the price goes up because he's put tariffs on them, which means the price of steel coming in is high. So everyone is worse off, and he's protecting a few jobs in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, because they happen to make steel. And that is what I think is so wrong about what he's doing. But there's another thing after the curious case of Donald Trump. Now we've got the American intrigue, as I call it. Now, while Donald's tweet, I got him, Donald, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but you know, we know who we're talking about here. Now, while the Donald's tweeting policies are almost as unpredictable as a Western Bulldogs premiership, I say that because I've been a long time Western Bulldogs supporter. I'll tell you a little story. We came from Sydney originally, and in the 50s it was, and I was a young bloke, and my father said, look, son, when you're in Melbourne, everybody supports a football team. And in 1954, Footscray won the premiership. And he said, get on a winner, son. And I did. And I did, and I've been with them ever since. And I tell you what, it was great back in 2016. And the other interesting thing is, I was actually 7 then, so you know how old I am now. I was 7 then, and we have a grandson who in 2016 was also 7. So there you go. What a coincidence! We both saw the Bulldogs have a win when we were that young. But with the Trump again, trying to predict what he's going to do is almost impossible. But since his election in 2016, and this I have alluded to before, it's incredible. But since that time in November 2016, the share market had gone up 49% up till about 2 weeks ago. Absolutely an astonishing increase. Absolutely an astonishing increase. And what we've seen in the last couple of weeks is that bit of indigestion. So that share
in the US.
In the US, yes, in the US. No, we haven't done anything like that. But where the share market is going like that, and their economy is roaring. Their share market's done like that, and their economy is doing that as well. Over the last 2 years, their economic growth, gone by 4.2%. Now, for the people who aren't familiar with all these percentage figures and stuff, 4.2% is great. For any advanced industrialised country to be growing at over 4% in this environment is a very, very good outcome. We're about 3%, Europe's about 1% if they're lucky, a bit more than that. They are doing great, and their unemployment rate is below 4%. Below 4%, again, the best in the world apart from Japan and China. And we're 5% something, and we've been like that for a couple of years now. As Paul Keating used to say, you might remember this, back in the 90s recession and before that when things were going all right, he used to say they're a beautiful set of numbers. A beautiful set of numbers. That was when I think our trade deficit was going into the red by a lot, and he said it's like the glass overflowing with with the Eno in the glass. You were going to say something, Roger? No, thank you. It was like the glass was overflowing, the effervescence was over the side. But he was describing things the figures that were coming out in Australia as a beautiful set of numbers. And I think that's probably what you could say about the US Central Bank. And you might be aware that Donald at the moment is attacking his central bank. saying, you know, they're silly and they're increasing rates and they shouldn't be increasing rates. Having said that, and they're supposed to be independent, by the way, but the boss of the US Central Bank, Jerome Powell is his name, he recently referred to their economy as, he said, they have a remarkable positive outlook for the US economy. That's the boss of the central bank about 2 weeks ago, he said this. And he said it's almost too good to be true. In other words, you've got the boss of the central bank and you've got the figures there showing that the American economy is in great shape. And you know, it's, and I might say what a contrast that was, because 10 years ago we had the start of the global financial crisis. Shocking period. And so the Donald, you could say, has had a few wins here. You know, he's good mates with the boss of North Korea, Kim Jong Un. You know, and he's now got smashed up NAFTA and now rebirthed it with different names. He got that Senator Brett Kavanaugh through there onto the Supreme Court. You know, he's had a few wins, but some of his policies I think are just out the door. But the facts are, because of him or not, they're doing all right with the seeds probably planted many years ago through the adroit handling of their economy by the central bank there, who do exactly the right thing in printing money and doing that sort of thing, and that is what has been of great benefit to the American economy in getting them out of the situation that was in there. The bottom line of all that I'm saying here is this American, as I call it, ebullience, is likely to rub off on the Australian economy. It's likely to rub off on the Australian economy and on stocks in our share market as well, with significant American presence. Now, with the American economy doing as well as what it is, then there are Australian stocks that are listed on our market, which are also deriving significant benefit, revenue from the US. And these would include CSL, Cochlear, Macquarie Group, Computershare, and even James Hardie. If you're looking for stocks at the moment that have exposure to the US without being listed on the American share market themselves, but are listed here, then they are the stocks that I would look for. And in fact, they are stocks that are on what I call my preferred list. So that's the background. Now, if they're doing well, sooner or later it's going to rub off here on our share market. So now to our economy. When I was thinking about this talk some time ago, and I was writing down a few notes about what I was going to do, and then we had last week, of course, which tended to upset some of my prior notes. But I'm managing to handle it. I think. But what we had was 2 weeks ago. The Reserve Bank put out a statement about they were going to make no change in interest rates. And the second paragraph of that statement, you can see it on their website whenever you care to look at it. They said specifically, and this second paragraph said, the global economic expansion is continuing. So not only America is doing well, but the rest of the world is not doing too badly either. He said financial conditions in advanced economies remain expansionary. Good again, 2 ticks. He said the Australia's forecast economic growth is a bit above 3% this year and next year. Now, if I said 4.2% was good, 3% is not bad either. A lot better than most European economies. So at the moment, this is the Reserve Bank speaking, not me doing my analysis. He said that the Australian economy is doing all right. Non-business investment is likely to increase. Household income, he said, remains low, the wages are a bit lower. But the labour market remains positive, and unemployment is expected to decline further from 5% now to a bit lower. Inflation is still around 2%, and interest rates remain low and continue to support the economy, while Sydney and Melbourne house prices are starting to ease. When you put all that into context, that you'd have to say is a high second class honours pass. Wouldn't you say that, Roger? Would you say that, sir, too? Thank you. Yeah, very good. Okay. All right. Now that report card, in my view, should help prick doomsayers bubble. I mean, I'm no great mate of doomsayers. And I was just speaking a little bit earlier on, I saw on the screen for today, you had that quote by Alan Kohler. You know, he said, crises are going to happen and they're going to happen, and you know, you take one step forward, one step backwards, 2 steps forward, 2.5 steps backwards, that sort of thing. And I was explaining to one of your members here a bit before this started, that if you try to put a description on someone, I describe Kohler as being on the negative side of neutral, and I'm on the positive side of neutral. And I believe I've been right more often than he has. You can go and check the record on that one.
Back Michael.
Yeah, right, okay. But I did mention also about the election next year. And look, before elections, there's always a period of uncertainty. Always is. You never know who's going to win. You don't know what their policies are going to be. And that's what can happen from now till next year, is that you're going to see a bit of uncertainty. But in the last elections, going back 4 or 5 elections, it hasn't impacted that much on the share market. It does a bit, but not that much. So I don't think there's too much to be concerned about that. And the economy will just simply have to move forward in automatic pilot. In other words, what the policies are now, just keep going, and then going okay. But one thing that does concern me is the changes that have been made to superannuation, not just now by what Shorten is going to do, but by what Treasurer Morrison did last year, when he said that if you've got a self-managed super fund, you can only put, as they call it, 1.6 million into a pension account. Are you familiar with that, most of you? Yeah. Okay, if you're in a pension account, then you don't pay tax. You don't pay tax in a pension account. So if you've got more than 1.6 million, that balance above that is in what's called the accumulation account. And that is subject to tax at 15%. Now, that is something that Morrison did last year. In other words, he's forcing you to go from a no-tax environment, because everything could have been in pension mode. Well, you don't pay tax. Now he said only 1.6 million could be done. So that was a change. I think that affects most people who've got super funds. But the other one is Bill Shorten. And what he's going to do, as I understand it, he's going to remove franking credits where you don't pay any tax. When I thought about this, I thought about when Paul Keating introduced superannuation. He didn't introduce it as franking, he introduced it as levelling the playing field between different business structures so that they'll all pay basically the same tax. And with companies, of course, they were subject to double taxation in the case of where you have shareholders who actually own the company. So the company's paying tax, and when they distribute that to you as the owner of the company, you pay tax as well. Totally unfair situation. Totally unfair. So you as a shareholder have paid tax up there because you own the company. And then when I give it to you as a divvy, you pay it again. You contrast that with someone who owns his own milk bar, for example, makes 100 grand or something, pays tax once and that's it. Whereas if it was a company that owned the milk bar, they'd be paying it twice. And that is what the situation was when Paul Keating decided to remove the double taxation of company income. Now it's very convenient for people like the Labor Party or like Bill Shorten to say we're getting rid of franking credits, so it's a gift. It's not a gift, it's the removal of the double taxation of company income.
They're stealing our money.
Pardon?
They're stealing our money.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I could have expected a bit better, but that's not bad. But that's the way I see the situation, which I think is totally unfair. And that is what I will be arguing whenever I can, because that is what the situation is. It's double taxation of company income under the guise of calling it franking as if it's a gift from heaven, when in fact it's not. And I think it's interesting that Paul Keating actually introduced this, and it's his own party that's, if you like, going back on it. Now Keating will say, oh yeah, we'll fudge around a bit. But that's what he said when he introduced it back in I think it was March of 2000 and, well, he did one major reform in September 1975, and I think imputation was introduced a little bit later after that. Okay, so now, having said that, I want to move on to the banks, because I think that's very important. Now, worries about the bank has been a keen topic of conversation in recent times because of the Royal Commission, and it's revealed significant wrongdoings on the part of the bank. Now, let me say, I have got no truck with anybody who tries to diddle somebody else. Anybody who wants to mistreat anybody else or mislead them or defraud them, I have got no truck with that sort of thing whatsoever. Let me put it that way. Now, what we've seen over the last couple of months, as I understand it, there's been 10,000 submissions made to the Royal Commission about people who have been wronged in one way or another. But in the broader context, understand the situation is that the banks employ about 180,000 people. They employ about 180,000 people. There are probably 15 million customers, probably even more than that in Australia. And you've got 10,000 problems. By and large, banks do a very good job. By and large, I look at our own banks, and I have no problem with the banks. I talk to other colleagues; they have no problem. But some people have been wronged, and that is not good. But I think in this situation, we've got to look at the broader context. Now, I see today one of the banks, well, it could have been National Bank, now making provision of about $300 million for remediation, as they call it. And I think when you add up all the other banks, it could be up to $1 billion, a couple of $100 million in each. And that's going to be something the banks are going to have to worry about when they make their next reports. And when we see the banks come down in price, probably 8 to 10% over the last month, for example. But the banks, CBA made $10 billion profit after tax last year. And the other banks somewhat less, about 6 to 8 billion a year. So while the couple of $100 million or $1 billion is a factor, it's not deadly to the banks as far as I'm concerned. But it's not good. And the situation is that I think that the question for the banks is what they're going to do in the future with their dividends. If they've got these costs, you could say, if you want to be optimistic, they're going to maintain their dividends or maybe slightly reduce them. But that would be the most I would see, given the dimensions that I've just mentioned. They're making $10 billion profit a year, they're paying out a couple of $100 million in remediation. And I think it's ironic. I mentioned a little while ago, Roger, I keep talking about Roger, but I haven't asked you all for your individual first names, and I can't actually point to you. But if you just keep listening, I will point to you. So just beware. But really, I think it is ironic, Roger, that after the global financial crisis, people were lauding our banks as being the greatest thing. We were the only country that our banks got through, and aren't they great people? And here we have the situation now. Absolutely incredible. And some people just want to hammer the banks as much as they can, which I think is a very bad thing to do. What we need is a very strong, robust financial system, and that is what we do have with the banks. So it's just interesting to see how ironic that is. But in my view, the banks are still should form a key part of anybody's portfolio, because their dividends are still very strong. Maybe a little less strong in the future. But I was looking at some figures today, just on the dividend yield of the CBA bank. If you have the CBA in your portfolio, it's currently got a dividend yield of around about 6.8% or something. If you add on franking, that's gone up towards 9%.
8.7.
Thank you very much, Roger. You've been doing you weren't even working on your calculator. I'm very pleased to see that. So there you go. And their price to earnings ratio, I don't understand what this means, but it's another figure, and that's only about 11 or 12. So the dividend yield actually is getting very close to the price to earnings ratio. The only time that I can recall where dividend yields were that close to what the bank's price to earnings ratio was in March of 2009, and that was just after the start of the GFC, and that was the time, if you ever wanted to buy a bank, that was the time to do it. So maybe you could look at it from that point of view. If you don't have banks, maybe if you wait a while, it might be excellent value. So The other thing I'd say about the banks is that what fires banks' profits is if the economy is doing well. If people have got jobs, and they've got mortgages, they can pay what they need, what they have to the banks. So as long as the economy is good, then the banks also should be good. And if unemployment goes down, that's even better. And the other thing that I think is important also, I mean, we've heard at the Royal Commission about people who got loans and they were dead and all this sort of stuff. I could never understand how a dead person could actually pay anything. So I don't know how they're actually getting money from dead people. I don't know. I don't know what the trustees or the executives were doing, for goodness sake. What were they doing? I mean, the person's dead and they didn't bother telling anybody. That's why I see it anyway. I cannot understand how dead people can pay anything. Anyway, that seems to be gone into folklore now, and dead people are paying and all that sort of stuff. As far as the share market is concerned, I guess you could get from the thrust of what I'm saying, it's pretty volatile, been affected by what's going on in America, but our economy is still okay. And that's what underpins the share market over the medium term. We're doing well, Roger, right? We're doing well. In time, so will the economy. So will the economy, and that's the way I see it. But our headwinds are the banks because they're a significant proportion of our whole market. But on the other hand, we've got the resources. We've got BHP, we've got Rio, we've got Woodside. Those stocks are doing well and are likely to benefit from the continuing strength in oil prices, in iron ore prices, other resources, and the fact that the rest of the world is doing okay. With China still importing lots and lots of our iron ore and coal, dare I say. But that's what's happening. So. As far as, just revert to the banks, as far as dividends are concerned, if you're really interested in dividends, what I have been advising my clients, and I was doing this several weeks ago, a month or so ago, with all the problems that were happening in the banks and with the problem with the Royal Commission and with the recommendations, with the final report next year and with Shorten and the coalition saying whatever Commissioner Haynes said he's going to do, we're going to do even better. All this sort of stuff is not positive for the banks. So that'll probably keep a lid on their growth and keep a lid on where they're going. But having said that, if you wanted to do anything and you had banks were a large portion of your portfolio, you could look at maybe trimming your bank shareholding, trimming them and putting them into other stocks that don't have the uncertainty of the banks, that pay okay dividends, and have got pretty good growth. Now, if you could get that would be not a bad substitute for banks. It's not an exact one, though. Not an exact one, but it's not bad. And those stocks at the moment are stocks that I've just mentioned, at BHP, Rio, Macquarie Group. That's another bank, but it's not like the big four because it's got most of its income comes from America. And internationally, I might add. And another one is the ASX, and another one is Wesfarmers. So there's about 5 stocks that are reasonable proxies for banks as far as both dividend and growth are concerned, and they don't have the uncertainty that the banks have at the moment. Other stocks that I had alluded to is CSL, for example, those American ones, and ResMed and James Hardie, even Breville Group. You're probably familiar with Breville Group, the kitchen appliance maker. So I think the share market is okay, but you've got to be selective about the sort of stocks you buy, and you've got to look at ones that don't have uncertainty and have got good growth. Now, I have a preferred list here of stocks which probably number about 40. You can split into blue chips, mid caps, and dividend stocks, and all that sort of stuff. That's what I do, and I'll mention a few here today that are okay, and you can ask some questions a bit later on if you want to. I just want to talk quickly about the Australian dollar. It's around about 70 odd cents at the moment, 71. Clearly, I think the trajectory for it is down rather than up. Maybe getting towards, maybe towards 65 cents. I think the long-term average is 70. But, with all the interest rates that are going up in America at the moment is making their country and currency more attractive than ours, because our interest rates aren't as strong as what theirs are at the moment. Now interest rates are likely to remain where they are for quite some time yet. Our lower dollar, though, is going to be very beneficial for a lot of Australian companies that actually export, and indeed for those companies that get that are manufacturing here for the domestic market. So that's the way I see the economy and the market in brief. But I'll just conclude by this. How am I going for time, Mark?
We've got questions to come.
We've got questions to come. Yeah, well, I did have part 2 of the talk, which went for about another 40 minutes, but I'll give that one a miss, and I'll just talk about the conclusion. Right? As I said, my view is that the economy looks in good shape. The economy is in good shape. Our political masters, though, are outdoing each other to see if they can sort of muck it up a bit, but I don't think they're going to succeed there. By responding to populist concerns, and as anybody pops their heads up and complains about something in this environment, the government will react and say, yeah, we'll fix you, as you've seen in the last couple of weeks with various things. I don't see our current economy as being anything like the GFC. Now, I've heard people talk about the GFC, right, and say, oh, you know, we've got to worry about the GFC. Look, if you go back 10 years to 2008, we were not looking at a slowdown in the economy. We weren't looking at a recession. We were looking at the implosion of the world's financial system. Not even the 30s depression would have even been like that. And I did happen to see a show, I think it was on the ABC or something, that was talking about the 2008 global financial crisis. And they had that meeting between the head of the central bank, the head of the Treasury, and a couple of the politicians, when they were talking about, straight after Lehman Brothers went to the wall, about giving $700 billion to the banks to bail them out, to bail the banks out. And the politicians said, no, why should we give them the banks? They were so shocking and caused all this sort of stuff. And Ben Bernanke, who was the chairman of the Federal Reserve at that stage, he was sitting on one side of the table, the politicians at the other, and one of the politicians said, what is going to happen if we don't give the banks this $700 million? What's going to happen next week if we don't give you this $700 million? He said, we won't have an economy. And that is what the situation was. You're at the brink. There were banks going to the wall. This is what was going on in 2008 at that time. You wouldn't have an economy next Monday if you didn't do that, and that was what was absolutely required. Because as it turned out, all the banks paid back the money. They all paid it back, and we've moved on. And then they reduced interest rates to zero, really to get things going, and they in fact did. I think Ben Bernanke, who was a scholar of the 1930s depression, he knew what it was about. He didn't. I don't think he actually lived through it as an adult, but he read about it. He got his PhD, as I understand it, and that sort of thing. So he knew what would happen. So he did go and print money, and everyone said, shocking thing to do. Well, it hasn't caused inflation.
Yeah.
And it's actually resurrected the American economy to be one of the best economies now in the industrialised world. So there you go. This situation now is if you like, a different one. It's certainly not, we're certainly not heading into anything like the GFC. I don't even think we're heading into anything like a recession, but it's a difficult period, but more difficult for the share market rather than the economy. So overall, I'll get back to Alan Kohler and me and him, Kohler and me.
You're positive.
Yeah, it also has a TV show, Kohler and me. Well, he's on the, as I said, on the negative side of neutral. I'm on the positive side of neutral, and as I said, my record stands well against Kohler's any day of the week. Thank you very much.
Michael, take a question for a few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
First of all, you didn't talk about the drought.
The drought.
And you didn't talk much about the 1.5% interest rate. Now, Jeff's got the microphone for other questions. John Green can go next, and then Ken can go after him. And then Peter after that.
Okay.
Michael, John Green speaking.
No, he's got to answer my question.
Oh, you answer about the drought.
Yeah.
Oh, the drought's a terrible thing for farmers, but we get through it. We've had droughts before. We give them assistance, and it's bad for them. But you can't go around, helping them out every time there's a drought, and then they have the good season. I think when farmers go into that business, they know it's going to be seasonal. So you get the good with the bad. Unfortunately, this is a bit bad. more bad than it has been for some time. But I can remember the drought we had in the 90s, went right through until it stopped. Well, I think when Bailey got elected. I don't want to be political about it, but I mean that's when we started to have all the
Central bank.
So I think it happens. So you can give assistance to the farmers, but it's not going to cause the economy to fall in
Right.
line.
And the central bank, why won't they raise interest rates?
What, here in Australia?
Well, because it does affect self-funded retirees. The interest,
Well,
can't get any money at the bank anymore.
well, I don't think that when the central bank determine interest rates, they've got term deposits at their forefront of their mind. What they're trying to do is make sure that the overall economy is working well. And if you need low interest rates to stimulate activity, that is what their main concern is. I think if you're looking for interest rate returns, term deposits, for example, are not the best way to go. I think that a judicious blend of some good shares, some hybrids, if you like, which are shares with a mixture of debt and equity, might be the way to go. But I don't think term deposit, when I talk to clients about that, you're not going to get it with term deposits, and the Reserve Bank determines interest rates on a much bigger range of factors other than what term deposits. I know it affects probably a lot of us here, but I would, if I was advising you, I'd say don't put all your money into term deposits.
Very good answer.
Yeah, thank you very much.
John.
Okay, John, go ahead.
Would you care to comment, please, on the share buyback, off-market buyback of Rio Tinto, please?
Thank you. Yeah, BHP, look, let me say, off-market buybacks have always been a great thing. They've been a great thing, particularly for superannuation people like yourselves here, because you get a lot of franking. Now, as it work, many people here got Rio, got their buyback thing? A few. Well, how it works is that Rio will buy back shares that you have in Rio at a 14% discount to the current price. That's the way it works. Say Rio is $70 on the share market at the moment, as it is. They will say, we'll buy them back for you at about $60. $60, right? So you say, well, $10 less. But the tax office has agreed that the capital component of that $60 will be $9. So in other words, you're selling them for $60, they're buying it for $9, but you're getting a dividend. That balance from $9 to whatever I said, 60, is a dividend. And with a dividend, they have associated franking credits. So what am I up to? I'm up to 10, from 60 is
50.
Good boy. 50. That's right. 50. Now the franking is 40% of any dividend. 40% of it, that's the way it is. 40% of 50 is what, $20? $20. So when you come to do your tax return next year, if you're in the pension mode, you're not subject to tax, you will get $20 as a franking credit. $20 as a franking credit. You can say, well, I've lost $10 because I sold it at 60, could have sold it at 70. You've gained whatever the difference is. You've been following me, Roger. How much gain is it now? $10. So if you had 2,000 shares, $10, not bad. Or if you had 100, whatever it is. So it could be worthwhile doing. And I would suggest to everybody who is here, have a good look at it. The complication is that you've got Shorten and his franking business, but I don't think it's going to affect this financial year. And also you've got to remember that, and the capital loss component, by the way, it's a capital loss. So if you're selling something for Rio for $9 and you bought it at 50, that's a capital loss. So if you're in the position of paying tax, in your accumulation account, if you're with me here? Thank you for those who have nodded there. If you're in the accumulation thing, you can use a capital loss to offset any capital gains. If you're in the pension mode where you don't pay tax, well, capital losses aren't worth anything. So, in brief, certainly have a close look at the Rio Tinto buyback.
Okay. I just want to throw one in, Michael, Jeff Wade. In the paper this morning, on the news this morning, and I think even last night, talking about the tax regime and changes to the tax system, and talk about raising the GST from 10 to 15%.
Yeah.
Your comment, please.
Well, you know, it's a matter of the government looking at all this sort of thing. I think there's a lot of changes you can make to the tax system to make it. I mean, obviously the government are doing it because they want more revenue. You know, that's pretty clear. But there's very many ways of doing that. I mean, you know, if I was the boss of the country, the Prime Minister, I would just have one tax rate for everybody. And you make sure that you adequately look after the low-income people through subsidies, whatever you want, but everyone's got the same. The other thing you could look at, and I'm a bit away from the GST thing, you could impose a tax on your family home when you go and sell it. I mean, you know, that's a sacred cow no one even talks about. But there's huge capital gain. A lot of people put all their money into their family home, and that is their nest egg, and they can go and sell it. As long as you live there for a year, you can go and sell it and get the capital gain, you pay no tax. I mean, that is probably one of the greatest tax loopholes in our system, but politically it would be explosive and no one's game enough to do it. But if they wanted to be really fair about everything, well, why should that be exempt when other things aren't? So it discriminates in favour of homeowners as opposed to renters, for example. Great, getting back to your GST question, if the government really was serious about getting a bit more revenue, well, that's the way to do it. And I suppose it's fairer because every bit of expenditure has tax on it, rather than having bits and pieces all over the place. Again, I think come after the election, that might be a possibility, but there's absolutely zero way it'll be done before the election. But I'd say that there's starting to be a bit of a groundswell about GST, so watch out for after the election, I think, for that. And if it does, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I think that's fair enough, especially if they could couple that with reductions in personal taxes.
Ken, can you stand up and come to get the microphone, please? No, microphone.
Oh, I'll shout out.
Yeah, go on.
Short question.
We can't hear you.
Can't hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Ken.
Short question. There's always talk about the rising national debt.
Yeah.
Can you briefly explain to us the significance of Australia's national debt, and is it a problem that the commentators seem to say?
The quick answer is no, I don't think it is. In Australia, our debt compared to GDP is considerably less than most other advanced countries, considerably less. Japan have had what they call a debt to GDP ratio. This is a bit of the one that a lot of people like to pick on. They've had a debt to GDP ratio. GDP is the economic activity in the country. They've been over 100% since the 50s, sorry. And they've been over 112, 150% or whatever. America is much larger than us, most European countries are, but you get by. To me, debt is not really a problem as long as you can pay the interest on the debt. That applies everywhere. And if you could get, as far as the economy is concerned, if you can get the economy growing more quickly, that's the best way to eliminate the debt as quick as you like. If we had economic growth going at about 6% a year rather than 3% a year, within the space of a few years, you're going to wipe out your debt because you've got so many more businesses and people paying tax because we're doing so much more. So you're getting more tax. And this happened, I think my recollection is, when Clinton got in. When Clinton got in, they had a lot of debt as well. And, you know, Clinton got elected in, what, 92, and probably a bit of a golden era for economies then, and John Howard was around that time from 96 onwards, and their economies were going well, very well, and I think Clinton wiped out his debt by the end of his term, if my memory is correct, by virtue of the fact that he got their economy going, or however, their economy was growing. So I'm not all that concerned about the national debt, and I think and if we weren't too, instead of focusing on having a balanced budget by the year 2020 or something, we're out there doing something, building all the roads and rail networks, doing all that. That's going to generate a lot of activity, a lot of jobs, a lot of income, and a lot of tax. And I think that's the way to go to make sure that the economy is doing all right, rather than worrying about whether you're going to have a balanced budget in 2020 or 2021. But that's my view, and I'm not in.
A very good answer. Philip's next, and then Peter.
What should we be doing now to protect ourselves against Shorten's potential grab of our franking credits?
I'll say a few things, Philip. Shorten's made this announcement. I don't know what the exact details of it are. I don't know whether he will wilt under pressure to say that people in that pension mode will still be able to get their franking credit. He may do that. The other thing is that we don't know the detail, as I understand it, of what it's going to be, other than what I've just said now. And then he's got to get it through the Senate. And then there's the time when it will apply, and I don't know that either. So
To get through the election first. though.
well, he's got to get through the election, of course. I'm assuming if he did, these are the problems that he would confront. So I don't think it's a lay-down misere that is going to happen. So if you wanted to protect yourself right now, well, you would perhaps concentrate on shares that pay very good dividends, even without worrying about franking. And you know, like your BHPs and Rios, they pay at the moment they pay around about 4 or 5%. And they're increasing in share price, so they're not bad. And you know, Wesfarmers is quite okay. And there's a lot of these ones, and also the banks are still paying good dividends, even forgetting about franking as well. So you know, you can say, well, if franking is an issue, where am I going to get the best dividend yield per se? And that could be in those sort of things that I'm talking about now. And just remember that even if you're in the accumulation phase and you do pay tax at 15%, you will still be allowed to claim that part of franking which will wipe out your 15%, but you won't get any more than that like you could have now. So there's still a bit of benefit there. So it's not completely Armageddon, and I don't want to jump the gun, but I think it's a very bad decision, but we'll wait and see.
Wait, us next.
Yeah.
Okay, Michael, Peter McGregor. I'd be interested in your comments on the likelihood of a trade war between America and China and its implications for Australia.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, the trade war. I mean, it's so-called trade war. You know, it seems to be just between America and China at the moment. He did have Europe in his sights at the start, and you know, all and sundry as well, and some of his own South American countries. I think it's a shame, absolutely a shame. I mean, when I studied economics, clearly the way to go ahead was free trade. Like I said at the start, do what you do best. Don't try and do that. What he's trying to do is, America imports a lot of things from China, like the iPhones, for example, you know, and lots of stuff from China, and it gives the people cheaper goods, which is really good. What he overlooks is that while America has got a trade deficit with China, in that they probably buy more goods from China, America has a significantly less deficit when you take into account services, which are, you know, intellectual property and all that sort of stuff, which is what the argument is at the moment, and tourism and all those, education, all those things that are included in services. So the deficit on services is much less than the traded sector. I think it's unfortunate. I think in the end it'll be worked out. You know, Trump thought Kim Jong-un was the worst thing on earth. Then he thought, you know, that Merkel wasn't too flash. And then Erdogan in Turkey wasn't so good. Now he's mates with them all. And
His tactics.
and I think he's even said that the boss of China thinks he's got a great big brain. Or something like that. He did that. He said they're very impressed with my very large brain. Did you see that? Yeah.
One more question from Robert.
So I don't think the trade war will be a great detriment, because if China can't export to America, they will, I think, stimulate their own economy, so they'll need our iron ore predominantly. So that's good for our major exporters to China, which is BHP and Rio.
They like our wine as well.
Indeed.
Michael, can I take you back to your comments about the reasons for the no GFC again? If I remember rightly, at the middle of the 80s, the interest rates were quite low. There was a sudden increase in oil prices, and many of the central banks increased their interest rates to avoid imported inflation. That was then impacted on all these mortgages that shouldn't have been there in the first place, and became part of all the exotic products that suddenly became the disaster that the GFC was. We've got very low interest rates now. We've got a lot of debt, personal debt around. Are those products still there, and are those the risk if interest rates suddenly go up again to a much higher level?
I don't know that I follow all of the question completely, but the latter part is, no, I don't see interest rates going up a lot in the short term. at all. I think the Reserve Bank have said they're not going to be doing anything for a while. I would believe that. And if they do, they'll go up gradually. They'll go, increasing interest rates by 0.25% by central banks seem to be the norm these days. And I think that's what will happen. So I don't think there's going to be any
The
catastrophic.
problem is the people that took out mortgages at very low rates
Oh,
are
yeah,
going to find
okay.
it more and more difficult to pay
Well-
for the mortgages. As the
Yeah, but I agree that's so, but it's mainly for people who have bought in the last 5 years. They're the only ones that are going to be affected, not so much people who bought many years ago at higher interest rates anyway. And I would have thought that, that anybody who took out a mortgage in the last 5 years at 4% must have been aware that this is very low, and it can go up to 7%. So I would imagine that a lot of them had sort of factored that in, and I understood that the banks were working on that anyway, certainly over the course of the last 2 years. But in my view, it's not Armageddon. As long as people have got jobs and the economy's doing all right, they're in a much better position to handle smaller increases in interest rates over a phased period than the alternative. Thanks, Bob.
Our vote of thanks will come from our Vice President, Keith Ross.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say thank you, Michael, but I find it very difficult.
Do you?
Yeah, because, I've got to go home and report to
Yeah.
her that must be obeyed, who did that same home economics course.